It was meant to be another typical political gathering: fancy suits, polished shoes, careful speeches. The Capitol Grand Hall was packed. Rows of powerful figures filled the room: senators, governors, wealthy donors, reporters standing shoulder to shoulder, bright lights everywhere, cameras ready to record every second. The energy was electric, but controlled. Like everyone knew, they were part of a show. President Donald Trump had just stepped off the stage. He'd delivered one of his usual crowd-pumping speeches. Bold, loud, unapologetic. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. The applause echoed off the walls. Then it began to settle down. That's when Vice President J.D. Vance was supposed to take the stage, but just as he moved toward the podium, something unexpected happened. A voice cut through the noise, loud, sharp, cold. It was former Vice President Mike Pence. He wasn't on the schedule. He wasn't invited to speak, but he stepped forward anyway, slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. He walked up to the microphone and didn't even look at J.D. Vance. "Let's stop pretending," he said. The room got quiet. We all know J.D. Vance isn't a leader. He's just Trump's obedient little puppet. A wave of shock moved across the hall. You could see it in people's faces. They weren't ready for that. This wasn't some quiet disagreement. It was a public insult, and it was aimed directly at the Vice President of the United States. All eyes turned to J.D. Vance. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there watching. Pence kept going. "You have no spine, Vance," he said, his voice steady but bitter. Just another follower hoping for crumbs. For a moment, it felt like time froze. Even the security team looked unsure of what to do. Was this real? Was this part of the plan? No one knew, but J.D. Vance remained calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. He stepped forward slowly. The tension in the room grew heavier with every step. Then he looked directly at Pence, straight in the eye, and he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Mike," he said, "if being loyal to a great man makes me a puppet, what does that make you?" He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. "A traitor with no strings? Or a servant for the enemy?" The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, sharp, uncomfortable. Someone in the back dropped a glass. The sound echoed loudly like a crack of thunder. Mike Pence's face shifted. He wasn't smirking anymore, but J.D. wasn't finished. He kept talking calmly, like someone who had waited a long time to finally say what needed to be said. "I stood by a president who stood by this country. You ran when things got tough. You didn't just walk away from Trump. You ran straight into the arms of the people who hate everything you once claimed to believe in." He took a breath, the kind of breath people take when they're about to say something that can't be unsaid. "You called me obedient," he said, "but you obeyed fear. I obeyed truth. And unlike you, I never turned my back on the people who trusted me." At that moment, Pence looked like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The crowd started to shift. Some people looked down, others looked straight ahead, frozen. Then a few clapped, softly at first, then more. You could hear it building. And backstage, President Trump just nodded. He didn't smile, he didn't clap, he just nodded, like a man who had seen this moment coming. It was no longer a debate, it was something bigger, a shift, turning point. Pence tried to turn away, tried to leave, but J.D. Vance stepped forward again. He wasn't finished. "You want to talk about loyalty, Mike?" he asked. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Where were you when cities were burning in 2020, when small businesses were being destroyed, when Americans were afraid to leave their homes?" J.D. looked across the crowd, not just at Pence anymore, at everyone. "You gave speeches, you quoted scripture, but you didn't lead, you hid, and now you stand here pretending to be the voice of reason?" The live stream numbers were exploding. Millions were watching. Thousands were sharing clips already, and Mike Pence could feel it. The tide was turning. "You say I don't understand what it takes to lead," Vance said. "But I do." He paused. "I stood firm. When others ran, when the media lied, when it wasn't safe to speak up, I still spoke." The room went quiet again. Then Pence finally spoke. His voice wasn't strong anymore. It was cracking. "You're young," he said. "You don't know the pressure I was under, the threats, the decisions no one else could see." J.D. didn't argue, he didn't yell. He just said, "You're right, I wasn't there, but I was watching, and so was America. And we all saw the same thing. When it mattered, you disappeared." That hit hard. Even Pence knew it. He tried to recover. "You don't know what it's like to sit in that chair," he said, his tone rising. JD stepped forward again.
Not angry, just clear. And you don't know what it means to stand for something, no matter the cost. He looked around again. The room wasn't divided anymore. It was shifting. Slowly, JD reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin
folder. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a copy of emails and documents from your office. Communications with Democrat PACs, dated just weeks after January the 6th. A reporter near the front gasped. Another raised a phone to record. Mike Pence's face changed instantly. "That's classified," he said, his voice louder now, almost panicked. JD shook his head. "Not anymore. A redacted version was cleared for public release. I had it approved."
Last night, he placed the folder on the podium. "America deserves to know the truth," he said. "This isn't about revenge. It's about honesty, about transparency." Mike Pence didn't speak.
He couldn't. The room fell into total silence again. And this time, it wasn't just awkward, it was historic. Even Trump backstage leaned closer to the monitor. Dee looked out over the crowd again. "You were Trump's vice president, Mike," he said. "Now, you're the Democrats' Aaron. You didn't just leave the team, you joined the other side." No one gasped this time. No one had the breath left to do it. They just listened. Because they knew this wasn't political theater anymore. This was the end of something old and the beginning of something new. The folder lay on the podium like a ticking clock. No one touched it. No one moved. The weight of what J.D. Vance had just revealed seemed to freeze the entire room, and yet he kept going. "This isn't personal," J.D. said, still calm. "It's not about grudges or headlines. It's about truth. The American people deserve leaders who don't hide behind speeches, leaders who don't smile for cameras while signing deals in the dark." He glanced at Pence again. "You said I'm just riding Trump's coattails. Maybe I am. But at least I'm not stabbing the man who gave me the coat." Pence's jaw tightened. He looked down briefly, then tried to push back. "You think I betrayed the movement," he said. "But I did what I had to do to protect the country from chaos." JD leaned in slightly. His voice dropped just enough to feel personal. "And what did that protection look like, Mike? Silence? Compromise? Handshakes with people who call us fascists?" He straightened up again and spoke louder. "You say you kept the country safe, but at what cost? You let the media tell the story. You let the other side define us while you tried to play nice." Some heads in the room began to nod slowly. Not with excitement, but with realization. "You didn't just avoid conflict," JD said. "You avoided responsibility." He looked out at the crowd again. His voice softened. "I remember the summer of 2020. I remember when families watched their businesses burn. When police were told to stand down. When Americans were told to stay
home while their cities were looted." He paused, letting the moment settle. "And you were silent. No one interrupted. You were the vice president," JD said.
"You had power. You had a voice. But you didn't use it for them. You used it for yourself. To protect your image. To protect your future." Mike Pence shifted uneasily. His fingers twitched against the edge of the podium. His eyes searched the crowd, but found no support. He continued, "You talk about pressure. We all felt it. Every American did. Parents, veterans, cops, nurses, truck drivers, everyone." He looked directly at a man wearing a construction vest in the crowd. "But while they stood in the fire, you stood behind curtains." Then JD stepped back from the microphone just for a moment. As if to give Pence a chance, Pence took a deep breath. "I was trying to hold this country together," he said. "I was trying to keep us from falling apart." JD nodded. "I believe you were trying, Mike. But the truth is, you were trying to stay comfortable." The crowd was silent again. And then JD Vance said something that shifted the tone entirely. "You weren't wrong to be afraid. You were wrong to let fear lead you." Pence blinked. He wasn't angry now. He looked tired, like a man who knew the room was slipping away from him. JD went on. "You called me a puppet," he said. "But let me ask you something. Who pulled your strings, Mike? Was it the media? Was it the party elites? Or was it your own fear of being unpopular?" JD paused. "Because when history looks back, it won't ask whether you were calm. It will
ask whether you were courageous." He took another step closer to the podium. "You had the platform.
You had the authority. But when it mattered most, you vanished." The live stream comments were going wild. Phrases like, "JD is saying what we all felt," and "he's right," Pence disappeared. filled the screen. JD placed both hands on the podium. Now, his voice still low, still steady. This isn't just about one man. It's about every politician who thinks their job is to look good instead of do good. He turned slightly to face the cameras. It's about every leader who watches this country suffer and says, let's wait and see, instead of standing up and saying, enough. Then he turned back to Pence. You want to talk about being Trump's vice president? Let's talk about it. The crowd leaned in. You were chosen. He trusted you. Millions of Americans trusted you. But the moment it got hard, the moment the walls started closing in, you chose to save yourself. JD's voice grew sharper now. You walked away from the fight, then came back pretending you were still part of it. He took a breath. Slower. This time, I'm not perfect, I don't claim to be, but I know who I fight for, and it's not the media. It's not the cocktail crowd in DC, it's the people who work hard, pay taxes, and get called extremists just because they love their country. There was movement in the room now, people starting to nod, some beginning to clap lightly again. Pence shook his head. You don't understand what it takes to hold this country together. JD looked directly at him and said, maybe not, but I know what it takes to not let it fall apart. And that line hit hard, harder than most people expected, because it wasn't about Trump. It wasn't even about Pence anymore. It was about what Americans had felt for years, leaders promising to protect them and then vanishing when things got ugly. JD looked out again. This country doesn't need more safe leaders, he said. It needs brave ones. The veteran in the front row who had clapped earlier stood up again, this time joined by several others. JD looked back at Pence one last time in that moment. You say I'm not ready. You say I'm just riding a wave. He pointed gently toward the audience. Well, that wave is made up of real people, and they're done being lied to. Pence didn't speak. He couldn't. Turned, looked at the cameras, and said, simply, this is your country. Not theirs, not the lobbyists, not the legacy medias, not the politicians who serve themselves. And for the first time that night, the entire room stood together. Not in chaos, but in clarity. The room was on its feet, not for show, not for tradition, but because something real had just happened, something they hadn't felt in years. Truth and JD Vance wasn't finished. He waited until the clapping faded, not out of politeness, but out of respect for what was coming next. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, he said. I came here to tell the truth, even when it hurts. He looked directly at Pence again. I don't hate you, Mike, but I won't protect you from accountability either. Pence looked up, surprised at the tone. It wasn't an attack anymore, it was something deeper, something more human. D continued, you sat in the second most powerful seat in this country. You had the chance to change history for the better, but instead of fighting the narrative, you gave in to it. He walked a few steps across the stage now, slowly, deliberately. When the media said, stand down, you listened. When big tech silenced voices, you nodded. When people begged for truth, you gave them silence. JD paused near the edge
of the stage, addressing the entire room now, not just Pence. That's the kind of leadership we've had for too long. Leadership that wants to be liked. Leadership that folds when the pressure shows up.
He took a breath and looked down for just a second, collecting his next words. My mother used to tell me something I'll never forget, he said quietly. She'd say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. He looked up. Well, we've had enough of falling. A strong ripple of applause spread through the crowd. Not thunderous, but firm, grounded, like they agreed, not just emotionally, but in their bones. JD walked back to the podium. He leaned in, calm, focused. You don't have to like Trump, he said. You don't have to agree with every word, he says, but you can't deny one thing. He stood in the fire and didn't flinch. He let that sit. He fought for people who felt forgotten. He broke rules, yes, but sometimes the rules were built to protect the wrong people. Now his
voice grew a little stronger. And Mike, when that fire got too hot, you didn't stand beside him.
You stepped back. You handed the media the story they wanted. JD turned slightly to the cameras again. We've got to stop pretending this country is fine. We've got to stop listening to leaders who act like everything is okay, as long as they're okay. He pointed gently at the audience. Look around. Real Americans are hurting. Not because they failed, but because the system failed them. A pause. They locked us down, shut our churches, crushed our businesses, divided our families, and told us to trust the experts. And where were our leaders? JD's voice became more deliberate now, more personal. They were writing books, doing interviews, chasing approval from people who never voted for them in the first place. He stepped back, as if disappointed. Not in the room, but in the story we've all lived through. You want to know what betrayal looks like? It's not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet handshake, a silent nod, a speech that says nothing while people lose everything. He turned back to Pence. You didn't have to agree with every strategy, but you had a duty to defend the people who defended you. And you didn't. Now Pence finally spoke, voice strained. It wasn't that simple. JD's voice didn't rise. But it didn't soften either. No, it was that hard. That's what leadership is. He looked out at the crowd again. We don't need more men who wait for the wind to blow before they speak. We need men who become the wind. That line hit hard. It wasn't just clever. It was conviction. Several more people stood to applaud, not because they were told to, but because something about those words touched something in them. JD raised one hand, gently, to quiet the room again. I don't
expect everyone to agree with me. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to tell the truth, even if it costs me everything.
He turned to Pence again. And that's the difference between us. Pence's lips tightened. His eyes dropped. He didn't speak again. JD stepped away from the podium and walked across the stage. One slow step at a time. I didn't grow up with power, he said. I didn't go to Washington expecting a red carpet. I went there with a simple mission, fight for the people who never get invited to the table. He turned toward the veterans, the working class men and women in the crowd. You built this country.
You defended it. You kept it running when everyone else stayed home. He gestured to them, one by one. And you're the ones they called dangerous. You're the ones they tried to silence. Then he turned, sharp and clear. Well, not anymore. Thunderous.
Applause now. Raw. Real. JD raised his hand again. I know I won't be perfect. I'll make mistakes. But I promise you this, I'll never abandon you to protect myself. He stepped back to the center. That's what a leader does. Not a perfect man, but a loyal one. A bold one. And then he said something that silenced the room again. I'd rather lose everything standing for truth than win by standing for
nothing. Even Pence didn't move. Even the journalists stopped typing for a moment because the line was more than just words. It was a mirror, showing everyone exactly what leadership should look like.
The crowd was no longer reacting like an audience. They were responding like a people who had finally been spoken to, honestly, without polish, without filters. JD stood at the center of the stage now, the spotlight steady on him. But he wasn't
smiling. He wasn't soaking in the attention. He was thinking,
feeling the weight of every word he was about to say. This moment right here, JD said quietly. This isn't about me versus Mike Pence. It's not about old versus new. It's about one thing, who is willing to stand up when it's hard. He pointed toward the doors at the back of the hall. There are people out there, good people, who don't know if they can afford gas this week, who are watching their kids get taught things in school that they don't even recognize, who've
lost their faith in every institution. He paused. They don't care about our party drama. They care about survival, dignity, freedom.
Then he turned to the stage's edge, speaking like a man who wasn't performing anymore, just telling the truth. I remember what it's like to be invisible, to feel like no one in Washington knows your name, your struggle, or your story. He looked down for a second, a brief, vulnerable pause. I remember watching my mom cry at the kitchen table because she couldn't pay a medical bill. I remember hearing politicians on TV saying, America's doing great, while we were eating canned food again. The room was dead silent, and I remember thinking, someday someone's got to tell the truth. Someone's got to fight back. Not with slogans, not with sound bites, but with guts. Now he turned back toward Pence, not with anger, but with a kind of tired honesty. Like, maybe you did the best you could, maybe you thought you were doing the right thing. But leadership isn't just about being a good man, it's about being
strong enough to take the hits when the storm comes. His voice dropped lower, and the storm came, and you ran. Pence finally spoke, quietly, defensively.
I was trying to protect the country from chaos. JD nodded respectfully this time. I believe you thought that. But here's what you don't understand. Chaos isn't what destroys a nation. Cowardice does. He looked at the crowd because when leaders stop standing for what's right, when they start playing defense instead of offense, the people suffer. Another ripple moved through the crowd, quiet heads nodding, silent tears from some. JD's words weren't just confrontation.
Anymore. They were reflection and conviction. He continued, slower now, letting every word breathe. We're in a moment right now, right here, where the future of our country is being written. Not by kings, not by committees, but by people, by truth-tellers, by those who
Aren't afraid to lose popularity for the sake of principle. He turned slightly to face the cameras. To every American watching this, I need you to know your voice matters more than you think. Your values matter more than they want you to believe. He leaned in closer. And if you've been told to sit down, stay quiet, or stop asking questions, don't. JD's voice rose one last time, steady and strong. Because this country doesn't belong to the elite. It doesn't belong to the pundits. It belongs to the people who get up every morning and keep it running, who sacrifice, who believe. A brief pause. And I believe in you. Then he turned back to Pence, calmly, decisively. I didn't come
here to finish you, Mike. That's not what this is, but I won't let you finish the movement either. Not while there's still breath in my body and truth left to speak.
He offered a final gesture, not an attack but a full stop. Go rest, Mike. History will decide the rest. Pence looked hollowed out. Smaller, not humiliated, just finished. He didn't reply. He simply stepped back from the podium, walked toward the exit, and disappeared into the shadows of the stage wings. Dee stood alone now, but he didn't look alone. He looked like a man who had just picked a fight with the old guard, and won. The crowd stood again, not just clapping, many with tears in their eyes, some holding their hearts, others raising their hands, not in anger, but in gratitude. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had said what needed to be said, not to score points, but to bring clarity, to bring fire, to bring hope. Dee looked out across the room one final time. We're not done. This movement isn't over, it's just beginning. He stepped off the stage to a sea of voices, some cheering, some weeping, all awake. And somewhere deep in the heart of America, a family turned off their television. A father looked at his wife. A grandmother wiped a tear. A teenager whispered to himself, maybe politics isn't dead after all. Because one man stood up and he didn't flinch. This wasn't a speech. It was a moment. And from this moment forward, the fight for America's future just got personal. If this moment hit you in the gut, don't just scroll past. Stand up. Speak out. Share this story. Because silence is how the old system survives. And truth? Truth only wins when people fight for it. If you believe America needs fighters, not puppets, hit that like button. If JD Vance earned your respect, share this with 5 people who still believe. Encourage. And if you're done watching weak men lead strong people, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning.